If someone had told me 40 years ago that the man I vowed to love forever would one day introduce me to his fiancée, a man, I would have laughed. Or maybe I would have cried. But life, as I've come to learn, has a way of playing its cruelest jokes in whispers. Not all heartbreak comes with shouting or slamming doors. Some come softly, like the sound of an old wedding band slipping off wrinkled fingers. I remember the day I met Daniel. It was spring of 1983. I was 21, full of sunshine and daydreams, working as a waitress in a tiny diner off Route 17. He walked in, wearing a white shirt rolled up to the elbows, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a movie. His eyes were calm but curious, the kind of eyes that make you believe you're safe just by being seen. He asked for black coffee, smiled at me, and left a tip that was more than the cost of the meal. I didn't know then that I was falling into a lifetime, one that would end with a confession I could never have imagined. Daniel was everything a small-town girl could want: ambitious, funny, and endlessly kind. He proposed under an oak tree where we used to sit and count fireflies. There was no grand speech, no orchestra, just the two of us, our hands touching, our hearts hopeful. I said yes before he even finished the question. We married that fall, surrounded by friends, laughter, and promises we thought were unbreakable. For 40 years, I lived believing in those promises. We built a home, raised 2 children, celebrated anniversaries with candlelight dinners, and grew old side by side. There were hard times, of course, arguments over bills, over silence, over dreams that didn't come true, but there was always love, or so I thought. Then came the morning that cracked the illusion wide open. It was a Thursday in June. I was sitting in our living room, knitting a blanket for our first grandchild, when Daniel said he wanted to talk. He looked nervous, almost pale, as if the air around him had turned heavy. I thought maybe he'd been diagnosed with something terrible. Cancer, maybe. My heart froze. But what he said next didn't come from a place of sickness. It came from truth. "Margaret," he began, "there's someone I need you to meet." I smiled politely, assuming he meant a new colleague, or maybe a friend from his church group. But the hesitation in his eyes told me this was different. "Who?" I asked. He looked down, then back up, and for a moment I could see the man I fell in love with, the man who could never lie to me, but always found the hardest words difficult to say. "His name is Samuel," he said softly. He's the person I love. We're getting married." Time stopped. I remember hearing the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, the way my own breath seemed to vanish from the room. I thought I had misheard him. I asked him to repeat it, and he did. Every word came out clear, heavy, final. He was calm, almost gentle, as if confessing to something he'd been rehearsing for years. I sat there, unable to move, unable to cry. My mind was trying to catch up with my heart, but it couldn't. I was too old to scream, too tired to run. I just stared at him. The man who had shared my bed, my memories, my entire adult life, and I didn't recognize him anymore. I asked him why. After all these years, why now? Why me? He said he'd known since he was young, but buried it deep because he was afraid. Afraid of judgment, of shame, of losing the family we'd built. He said he loved me, truly loved me, but not in the way a man should love a woman. He said that for 40 years, he tried to be what the world expected him to be, what I expected him to be. And now, at 65, he couldn't live a lie anymore. I don't remember standing up, but I did. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden we planted together. Roses, hydrangeas, the oak tree in the back. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream. But all I felt was emptiness. When I turned back, he was crying, not loud sobs, just quiet tears of relief, maybe guilt. I told him to leave, not forever, but for now. I needed space to breathe, to exist outside of his shadow. He nodded, picked up his coat, and left. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in 40 years, the house felt hollow. I didn't eat that day. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on our bed, staring at the dent where he used to lie. I thought about all the anniversaries, the laughter, the touches, and wondered, was it all pretend? Did he ever really love me? Or was I just part of the disguise he wore to make the world believe he was someone he wasn't? But even as anger simmered beneath my grief, a strange sense of understanding began to bloom. I was hurt, yes, but somewhere deep down, I realized that his confession wasn't just about betrayal. It was about liberation. His, and maybe, eventually, mine too. Because truth, no matter how painful, is always a kind of freedom. And yet, I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. I was still the woman who'd just been told her 40-year marriage was built on silence. That night, I whispered to myself, after all these years, I thought I knew love. Maybe now I'll have to learn what it truly means. 3 days passed before Daniel called again. I didn't answer the first 2 times, but on the third, something inside me said, pick up. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the ache of habit. After 40 years, your heart doesn't just stop loving on command. It lingers, confused, unsure of which memories are still safe to hold on to. Margaret. His voice trembled through the receiver, softer than I'd ever heard it. Please, I just want to see you once more. There's so much I need to explain. I didn't promise anything, but the next morning, I found myself standing in front of the cafe where he said he'd meet me. It was the same one where we used to have breakfast every Sunday after church. Same chipped tables, same smell of cinnamon and coffee. The only thing different was us. I felt like an actress stepping back onto a stage where the play had ended long ago. When Daniel walked in, I barely recognized him. His face looked lighter somehow, as if the burden of decades had lifted. And that, strangely, hurt the most. He looked free. I was the one still trapped. He sat down across from me and smiled nervously. You look beautiful, Margaret. I didn't return the compliment. I was too busy fighting tears. So, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "You wanted to talk." He nodded. "I wanted you to hear everything from me, not from anyone else." I stared at him, my hands gripping the cup so tightly the porcelain threatened to crack. "You mean before the town starts whispering?" He flinched, guilt spreading across his face. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. Every moment we shared, it was real." "Real?" I whispered. "Real for you, maybe. For me, it was a life built on make-believe." He looked down. "It wasn't make-believe, Margaret. I did love you. You were my best friend, my partner. But I was never honest with myself, and that made me dishonest with you." For a moment, silence sat between us, like a third person. And then he said something that made my heart twist. "I want you to meet him," he said quietly. "Samuel. Not because I expect your approval, but because I owe you the truth, all of it. You deserve to see who he is." I almost laughed. The audacity of it. After shattering my world, he wanted me to meet the man who replaced me? I opened my mouth to refuse, but what came out instead surprised me. "When?" He blinked. "Are you sure?" "No," I said, "but I'll come anyway." That night I sat at home, staring at the old photo albums spread across the table. Pictures of us through the years, vacations, Christmases, the kids' birthdays. His arm always around me, his smile always soft. I ran my fingers over the images and wondered when the pretending began. Was it from the start, or did something inside him shift along the way? By morning I had cried myself into exhaustion. There were no tears left, only a strange calm. Maybe meeting Samuel would give me closure, or maybe it would break me completely. Either way, I had to see. Daniel picked me up that afternoon. The drive was quiet. The radio hummed softly, an old love song we used to dance to in the kitchen. I caught him glancing at me once or twice, as if trying to read my thoughts. But I didn't offer him any. We pulled up to a small house by the lake, neat, sunlit, with a porch full of potted plants, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a storybook. My stomach twisted. He built a home with someone else. The door opened before we even knocked, and there he was, Samuel. He was younger than us, maybe in his 40s, tall and calm, with kind eyes. Not the villain I'd imagined, not some reckless stranger. He looked nervous, almost fragile, like someone who knew he was walking into another person's heartbreak. "Mrs. Whitman," he said softly, extending his hand. It's an honor to meet you." I stared at that hand for a long time. Then slowly, I took it. His grip was warm but gentle. I expected to feel anger. I expected to hate him. But instead, what I felt was something I hadn't anticipated. Pity. Because in that moment, I realized he wasn't the thief of my happiness. He was simply the truth that had been hiding behind Daniel's eyes all those years. We sat in their living room. Everything was simple, quiet. Books on the shelf, framed art, the faint smell of lemon candles. Samuel poured tea, his hands shaking slightly. Daniel sat beside him, visibly uncomfortable, torn between guilt and love. I broke the silence first. "So, how long?" Daniel's eyes darted to mine. 5 years, he said. "It started after I retired. We met through volunteer work. I tried to fight it at first, Margaret. I really did." 5 years. That meant all those evenings he told me he was mentoring young volunteers, he was with him. I nodded slowly, swallowing the bitterness. "And all that time, you just kept lying?" "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "Protecting me from what? The truth?" I asked. "You didn't protect me, Daniel. You erased me." You left me living in a story that wasn't real." Samuel spoke softly. "I know I have no right to ask this, but please don't hate him. He's carried this pain for decades. He never wanted to hurt you." His voice cracked, and to my surprise, he looked like he meant it. I felt a sting in my chest, not from anger, but from empathy. This man had loved Daniel enough to risk the judgment, the scandal, the whispers. And Daniel had loved him enough to finally stop pretending. I looked at both of them. Two men sitting there, holding hands now, trembling but unashamed. And I realized something I hadn't before. Love, no matter how complicated, doesn't always fit the rules we were raised to believe in. It just exists. That didn't erase the pain, though. It didn't undo 40 years of my life. I stood up slowly. "I don't hate you, Samuel," I said. "But I can't stay here either. I need time. Maybe someday I'll understand all this without breaking inside." Daniel stood too. His eyes glistened with tears. "Thank you for coming, Margaret. That means more than you know." I nodded, then turned toward the door. As I stepped outside, the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. The world looked peaceful, even though mine had just been rearranged. For the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was without him. But maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of finding out. That evening, when I returned home, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Every room whispered his name. The hallway still smelled faintly of his cologne. His shoes, old, worn, neatly placed by the door, seemed to mock me with their silence. I sat on the couch and stared at the empty space beside me where he used to sit and read. The air felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were grieving. I thought meeting Samuel would give me closure, but instead it opened more wounds. I didn't hate Daniel. I couldn't. Love doesn't dissolve overnight, no matter how deep the betrayal runs. But I hated the years I lost to pretending. I hated the younger me, who spent decades believing that being a good wife meant never asking if I was truly seen. The next morning, I called my daughter, Emily. She lives 2 states away, busy with her job and 2 kids, and I hadn't told her anything yet. When she picked up, I hesitated. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice already lined with worry. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied. "Just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. "Is something wrong with Dad?" I almost said no, but the truth sat too heavy on my tongue. Yes, something's changed. He's not the man we thought he was. Later that evening, when Emily called again, her voice cracked through tears. "Mum, I don't understand. Are you saying Dad's—" "Yes," I whispered. "He's in love with a man." She went silent. I could hear her breathing, steady but trembling. "Oh, Mum," she finally said. "I don't even know what to say." "Neither do I admitted. "But I think that's okay for now." After the call, I sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset melt into shades of orange and gold. I thought about all the women I'd known who carried invisible heartbreak, widows, divorcees, wives of men who stopped loving them long before they said it aloud. I was one of them now, a part of that quiet sisterhood of pain. But something inside me began to stir, something fierce and small, like a spark under ashes. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else's comfort. I was forced to look inward, to ask who Margaret was when she wasn't Daniel's wife. The first week was agony. I moved through the house like a ghost. I cried over coffee. I cursed the universe. I even tore our wedding photo in half one night, then taped it back together the next morning, because I couldn't stand the emptiness of the space where his face used to be. Healing, I realized, wasn't neat. It was messy and ugly and full of contradictions. But with every passing day, something shifted. I began walking in the mornings again, like I used to before life became predictable. I found an old camera in the attic, dusted it off, and started taking photos of small, ordinary things. The way sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, the reflection of the oak tree on the pond, the laugh lines I'd spent years hiding. One afternoon, I stopped by the farmer's market downtown. It had been ages since I'd gone alone. As I wandered between stalls of flowers and handmade soaps, a woman around my age smiled at me. Her name was Helen. She sold homemade jam and had a laugh that could melt ice. "You look like someone who's seen a few stories," she said kindly as she handed me a sample. I smiled faintly. "You could say that." We talked for nearly an hour about gardens, grandchildren, and how time has a cruel but gentle way of teaching us who we really are. When I got home that evening, I realized something profound. I had gone a whole day without thinking about Daniel. Still, at night, when the house went quiet, the ache returned. The bed felt too large. I would reach across to his side, half expecting to find him there, but all that met my hand was cold air and the faint memory of warmth. One night, I couldn't sleep. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the garden. I thought about Samuel, his eyes, his gentleness, how he'd looked at Daniel with a kind of affection I recognized instantly. I wondered if that was what real love looked like, the kind that didn't need pretending. For a moment, I hated myself for understanding. But then I thought of Daniel's face when he confessed, how broken yet liberated he looked. And, for the first time, I whispered aloud, "Maybe you deserve to be free." It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a step toward peace. Weeks turned into months. I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children on weekends. Their laughter filled spaces that had long been empty. I baked cookies again, joined a book club, even started journaling, something I hadn't done since my 20s. Each word I wrote was a stitch in the torn fabric of my soul. One morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar. Daniel's. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter. "I hope one day you'll see this not as betrayal, but as the truth finally setting both of us free. With gratitude and love, Daniel." I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't cry, not this time. Because somehow I knew he was right. Freedom had a strange sound to it, quiet, heavy, but honest. That night, I sat in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection. Wrinkles traced my cheeks. Silver strands framed my face. I wasn't the young girl who fell in love under an oak tree anymore. I was a woman who had lived, loved, lost, and learned to stand again. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Because sometimes the end of one love isn't the end of life. It's the beginning of learning how to love yourself. The seasons changed quietly, almost respectfully, as if nature itself understood that I needed gentleness. The oak tree in the backyard, the same one where Daniel once proposed, shed its leaves in soft spirals of gold. I used to dread autumn. It reminded me of endings, but that year, I saw something else in it. Every falling leaf was a promise that life could begin again, even after loss. By November, I had a routine. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, afternoons with reading at the library, evenings spent writing in my journal. My entries started as grief poured onto paper, that slowly they turned into letters of hope. I didn't realize it then, but I was writing my way back to myself. One afternoon, Emily came to visit. She hadn't seen me since the day I told her about Daniel. I expected awkwardness, but the moment she walked through the door, she hugged me tightly, as if holding all the years we both lost to silence. "Oh, Mum," she said, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I was so angry at Dad, but now I just feel sad. For him, for you, for all of us." Watching them play reminded me that love still lived here, just in a different form now. After dinner, Emily asked the question I knew was coming. "Have you talked to him since the letter?" I shook my head. "No, there's nothing more to say. I think we both said what needed to be said in silence." She nodded slowly. "You're stronger than I thought, Mom." I smiled. "I didn't have a choice, sweetheart. Strength isn't something you're born with. It's something life carves into you." That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat by the window and looked up at the stars. I remembered all the years I'd spent wishing on them, for love, for family, for happiness. I never thought I'd be wishing for peace instead. But peace, I realized, was the greatest kind of happiness after all. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the garden, soft and quiet. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. I decorated the tree alone for the first time in decades. Each ornament carried a memory, a dance, a laugh, a promise once made. I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered thank you to each one, as if acknowledging that every joy and every wound had shaped who I had become. On Christmas Eve, Helen from the market called. "You're not spending the holiday alone, are you?" she asked. I smiled at the warmth in her voice. "I was planning on it." "Over my dead body," she laughed. "Come over. We're making mulled wine and watching old movies." I hesitated, then said yes. Maybe I was tired of solitude, pretending to be strength. Her home was cozy and alive. People laughed, music played, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. Helen introduced me to her friends, widows, divorcees, women who carried their own scars but wore them with grace. We talked about love, about loss, about starting over. One woman, Clara, said something that stuck with me. "We spend half our lives waiting for someone to make us whole, and the other half realizing we already were." That night, as snow fell softly outside Helen's window, I laughed, a real belly-deep laugh. It felt foreign, almost strange, like rediscovering a forgotten part of myself. The following months were gentler. I joined Helen's gardening club in spring, learned how to grow lavender and wild roses. The smell of earth on my hands felt grounding, real. It reminded me that even after the harshest winter, life pushes through the soil, stubbornly, beautifully. One day, as I knelt in the dirt planting new seeds, Helen said, "You've changed, Margaret." I looked up, brushing soil off my palms. Maybe I've just stopped waiting for the past to make sense. She nodded knowingly. That's when it starts to lose its power. Later that summer, I attended Emily's anniversary celebration. The whole family gathered at the park. Daniel didn't come. He sent a polite card and gift, but somehow I didn't mind. I had imagined that day 1,000 times in my head, how awkward it might be if he were there, how much it might hurt to see him happy. But the truth was, I didn't think of him much at all. During the party, my grandson Jacob came running up to me, holding a wilted dandelion. "Make a wish, Grandma." I took it carefully, smiled, and whispered my wish before blowing the seeds into the wind. "What did you wish for?" he asked eagerly. "Nothing," I said softly. "Everything I need, I already have." He grinned and ran off, leaving me watching the seeds drift through the sunlight. I thought of how fragile they looked, and yet how each one carried the power to start new life wherever it landed. When I got home that evening, I opened my journal and wrote, "I'm not the woman who lost her husband. I'm the woman who found herself after losing him." The truth no longer hurt the same way. It wasn't a knife anymore, it was a scar. And scars don't disappear, but they stop bleeding. A few weeks later, I received a postcard from Vermont. No return address, just a short message. "The lake here reminds me of home. I hope you're happy. D." I smiled faintly, tucked the postcard inside my journal, and whispered, "I am." That night, I lit a candle and sat by the window, the moonlight glimmering over the garden. I realized something profound. Love doesn't always end where you think it does. Sometimes it transforms, reshapes itself into gratitude, forgiveness, and quiet acceptance. And as I sat there, wrapped in the silence of a new life I'd built from the ashes of the old one, I finally understood that endings are rarely the opposite of beginnings. Sometimes they're the same thing, just seen from the other side. There's a certain peace that comes with age, a quiet understanding that life rarely goes according to the plans we make when we're young. I used to think that happiness was a destination, something you reached after enough love, effort, or sacrifice. But as I grew older, I realized it's not a place at all. It's the moments we collect while surviving what was meant to break us. It had been nearly 2 years since Daniel's confession. The shock had softened into memory. The pain, once raw, had turned into something gentler, a dull ache that lived inside me like an old friend. Some mornings I still woke up expecting to hear him humming in the kitchen, the smell of his coffee drifting through the house. But instead of sadness, I'd feel gratitude, because even if our story didn't end the way I once dreamed, it was still ours. One afternoon, while tidying the attic, I found an old box labeled Margaret's Dreams. Inside were things I'd long forgotten. Paintbrushes, half-finished sketches, and a short story I'd written when I was 20. I smiled, tracing the faded ink with my finger. Somewhere along the way, between raising children and managing a household, I'd stopped creating. I'd stopped being me. That night, I pulled out a canvas and began to paint. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple image of the oak tree in my backyard, its roots deep, its branches wide. But as the brush moved, I felt something reawaken inside me. The woman I used to be, the dreamer, the artist, The girl who believed life was meant to be lived fully. She hadn't died. She'd just been waiting for me to remember her. I started painting every day after that. Sometimes landscapes, sometimes faces from memory. I even joined a small art group at the community center. Helen came with me once and laughed. "Would you look at you?" she said, glowing like a woman half her age. I laughed too. Maybe that's what happens when you start living for yourself. In spring, an art gallery in town held a local exhibit, and Helen insisted I submit one of my paintings. I chose the oak tree. It wasn't perfect, but it meant something to me. To my surprise, it sold within the first week. The gallery owner said the buyer left a note. "Your painting reminded me that beauty can grow even from the deepest roots of sorrow." I didn't know who wrote it, but their words stayed with me, because that was exactly what my life had become, a quiet gardener's beauty growing from the ashes of heartbreak. Around that same time, Emily called with news. "Mom, Dad's in the hospital." My breath caught. What happened? "It's not serious," she said quickly. "He had a mild heart attack. Samuel called me. He thought you should know." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The thought of seeing him again filled me with emotions I couldn't name. Fear, nostalgia, compassion. The next day, I went to the hospital. When I walked into the room, Daniel looked older, frailer, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "Don't talk," I said gently. "Just rest." Samuel was there too, sitting quietly by the window. When our eyes met, he nodded in gratitude. For the first time, I felt no resentment, only understanding. Love, I realized, isn't a competition. It's a capacity. There's always enough room in the world for two kinds of love, the one that built you and the one that freed you. Daniel reached out a trembling hand. I took it. His skin was warm, familiar, fragile. "You came," he said softly. "I told you once," I replied, "that love doesn't vanish. It just changes shape." He smiled faintly, tears glistening in his eyes. "You were always the best part of my life." I didn't respond with words. I simply squeezed his hand and stayed there until he fell asleep. Watching him, I felt something settle inside me, a peace I didn't know I'd been chasing. I had forgiven him, not because he asked, but because I deserved the weight to be gone. Over the next few days, I visited him often. We talked about the past, about the children, about the small joys of ordinary days. Samuel and I even shared a few quiet conversations over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. He told me Daniel still kept an old photo of us in his wallet, the one from our wedding day. Somehow, that made me smile. When Daniel was discharged, I hugged him goodbye. It wasn't a long, tearful embrace, just a gentle one, full of unspoken acceptance. "Take care of yourself," I said. "You too, Margaret," he whispered. That was the last time I saw him. A year later, a letter arrived in the mail. This time, it wasn't in his handwriting. It was from Samuel. "Dear Margaret, Daniel passed peacefully last night. He spoke of you often, of your kindness, your strength, your grace. He said you were the greatest chapter of his life. I wanted you to know that he left behind a letter for you." Enclosed was a small envelope in Daniel's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. I've carried both guilt and gratitude for you every day of my life. You were my compass when I was lost, my peace when I couldn't find myself. I hope you've found joy again. I hope you've painted the world with all the colors I never gave you. Thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it. You were my home, always. Tears fell freely. Not from pain this time, but from love, the kind that survives everything. I drove to the lake that afternoon, the same place where I'd once met Samuel and Daniel together. The water shimmered beneath the sunlight. I whispered a quiet goodbye and tossed a single rose into the lake. It floated gently before disappearing into the distance. That evening, I lit a candle by the window. The flame flickered softly, reflecting in the glass like a small heartbeat. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Daniel was gone, but the love we shared, both flawed and beautiful, had shaped me into someone stronger, someone freer. And as I closed my eyes that night, I realized forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering without bitterness. It's about saying, "You hurt me, but I still wish you peace." When people ask me now, "Margaret, how did you survive everything you went through?" I smile, because the truth is, I didn't just survive, I grew through it. There's a difference. Survival is when you're holding on by a thread, waiting for the storm to pass. Growth is when you open your arms to the rain and say, "All right, I'm still here. Let's begin again." After Daniel's passing, I spent months relearning how to live alone. Not in loneliness, but in peace. The silence of my home no longer scared me. It became my companion. I'd wake up early, make tea, and sit by the window, where the morning light spilled in like a soft blessing. The world moved on, as it always does, but I'd finally learned how to move with it, not against it. Some days I'd still feel a pang of sadness. That's the thing about love and loss. They never really leave you. They linger, like music playing softly from another room. But instead of trying to silence it, I began to listen. Those memories weren't ghosts anymore. They were proof that I'd loved deeply and lived fully. I started volunteering at a community center where widows and older women gathered every Thursday. We'd share stories of heartbreak, resilience, and rediscovery. I remember one woman, Evelyn, who sat beside me one afternoon, eyes wet with tears. "I found out my husband had another family," she whispered. "I don't know who I am anymore." I held her hand and said softly, "You're still you. You. You just forgot for a while. Pain doesn't erase us. It reminds us we're real." She smiled through her tears, and in that moment, I realized something profound. My story, as painful as it had been, had purpose. Every scar, every lonely night, every broken dream, it all led me here, to this quiet wisdom I could share with others. My suffering wasn't wasted. It had become my strength, my offering to the world. That winter, Emily invited me to stay with her for the holidays. Her home was warm and full of laughter, children running around, the smell of cinnamon in the air. At dinner, my grandson asked, "Grandma, were you ever scared to be alone?" I looked at him, smiled, and said, "Yes, sweetheart." But then I realized being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Sometimes it's where you find the truest parts of yourself. He nodded like he understood, though he was too young to grasp the depth of it. Still, I knew one day he would. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood by the Christmas tree, the lights twinkling softly. There was a photograph of Daniel on the mantel, next to one of all of us together from years ago. I picked it up and whispered, "You'd be proud of them, Daniel. They're strong, just like we raised them to be." For the first time, the memories didn't sting. They warmed me. The following spring, the gallery invited me to do a solo exhibition, a collection of my paintings that reflected my journey through grief and healing. I called it Seasons of the Heart. Each canvas told a piece of my story: the storm, the silence, the sunrise. On opening night, as people moved quietly through the room, I stood near the oak tree painting that had started it all. A woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "Your work, it feels like hope," she said. And that was it. That was the word I'd been searching for all these years. Hope. Not the naive kind that waits for things to get better, but the kind that grows through pain. The kind that whispers, "Even this will pass." As I looked around the gallery, I realized I wasn't the broken woman who had once cried over betrayal. I was someone new, someone whole, someone peaceful. My life had become a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and rediscovery. On a quiet Sunday evening, I sat in my garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep blue. I thought about everything: the love, the loss, the laughter, the tears. And I felt immense gratitude. Because here's the truth I wish every woman, every person would understand. You can lose everything and still come home to yourself. You can be betrayed and still love again. You can be forgotten and still matter. Life will break you in ways you can't imagine, but it will also rebuild you with hands far gentler than you expect. I used to think my story ended the day Daniel confessed his secret. But now I know that was just the moment my real story began. It was the day I learned that endings aren't punishments. They're invitations to start anew. As twilight settled, I whispered to the breeze, "Thank you, Daniel, for the memories, the lessons, and the freedom to become who I was always meant to be." A single petal drifted from the rose bush beside me, landing on my lap. I smiled. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe, just maybe, it was his way of saying goodbye. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the soft rhythm of my heart, steady and strong. Life had tested me, yes, but it had also blessed me. And if there's one message I could leave for anyone listening, it would be this: no matter what breaks your heart, no matter who walks away, don't let it turn you bitter. Let it make you better. Let it teach you how to love yourself so deeply that no one's absence can take that away. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength. And moving on isn't forgetting. It's choosing peace over pain, freedom over fear, and love over loss. So, to whoever's listening to my story tonight, if you're standing in the ashes of what was, wondering how to begin again, I promise you this. One day, the hurt will stop defining you. The sun will rise again, and when it does, you'll see the woman or man staring back at you in the mirror isn't broken. They're reborn. And maybe, just maybe, that's what love was meant to teach us all along.